Okay. Great. Well, it is just 5 o'clock. Councilor Merritt is going to join us, but he's not able to be here quite yet. And but I am mindful of our time. We have only 1 hour before a scheduled executive session tonight, so I want to be, honor the people who came to help us work through the budget. And I thought we would start because Chief Lowe is here with discussion of a number of questions that councilors had asked during public safety staffing levels and the public safety section of the budget. And as we wrap that up, or maybe after we wrap that up, I believe the town manager is going to provide us with some updated figures and things that she alluded to last night. So this is the June 1st Orono Town Council budget workshop. And I'm not sure what the best place to start is. I don't necessarily want to go back to the book if we have a number of questions that we've asked staff to address with us. So yeah, we had first, we had a question on Orono fire responses, the numbers. Chief Lowe and Sophie provided us with call data. Excuse me. That's just going to go off for a second. And were there any questions or concerns regarding that data, or did it help us answer any questions that we had regarding staffing levels for our public safety infrastructure funds? So questions.
Full disclosure, I barely skimmed over that because I didn't know that this is kind of what we'd be going here tonight. So
yeah, we had this section kind of left over, and we asked Flo to be here to talk about this section, and then we get into, I think, some of the budget discussion that we talked about at the end of last night's meeting, which is what does the proposed budget look like now that if we put in those different levels of cuts. But while we have staff here, I thought maybe we should address that first. So Orono fire response numbers, very robust. Anecdotally, we know we're busy. Now we have the data behind it.
maybe first line, 22 building fires this year, like 24 last year. I think we talked, you talked about this kind of initially. It's like we think building fire, we think, running screen. That's not necessarily right what this equates to. Can you give any more, like, not just more my edification? It's not necessarily, I guess. It does kind of lead to the discussion of the air quality. If there's, when do we have carcinogens on our material, and I also think I thought there was some washing capabilities there as well. So it sort of feeds to that, but I am curious of the 22, basically, average roughly 2 a month that we're calling building fires. Do we have any idea when, like, the scale of these, do we put them, quantify these in any other way or any deeper way, or is this just?
Well, I mean, we can quantify that.
And I'm not suggesting like, let's go do this. I'm just curious if this is what if we do.
So we can break it down to, was it a fire that involved the stove and then got into like the cabinets over there? We can break it down now. We can say this was a small electrical outlet fire that caught the wall on fire. Those would all be considered structural fires. If you light your couch on fire by mistake, that would be considered a building fire. If you're looking at it from the perspective of carcinogens, anything that burns that we respond to is going to give off carcinogens, especially with the prevalence of hydrocarbon-based products like your couch and the cushions in the couch and your carpet and all those types of things. So, and even vehicle fires, which will give off carcinogens, and the woods fires that we go to, even though we don't always wear respiratory protection, we should, because it is in an outside environment. The fact that we're moving through the soot and the carbon and the charcoal and stuff like that tends to put some of those carcinogens on our clothing.
And I assume it's much worse what you're breathing at that scene than it probably is what's going to come back off the.
At a building fire or a vehicle fire, absolutely. 100%. Yeah. I mean, that's the direct route into the bloodstream is by breathing it in. So
With the building fires, do you quantify them with, like, do some of them have injuries, or is that a category that we look at?
So it is a category we look at. We look at both injuries to firefighters and to civilians. I think in the last 5 years, there have been probably 2 or 3 building fires that have resulted in civilian injury. And then there has been at least 1 firefighter injury that I can think of directly related to a building fire. But I don't know that for sure. I'd have to go back and pull that data. Just approximately.
Okay. Like I said, I kind of just skimmed through this stuff and.
Yes,
It's
Go
all right.
ahead.
You go first and then I'll go.
I was gonna ask about the mutual aid table at the bottom. It looks like we're up, so this is mutual aid received. This is other towns responding to calls within Orono.
That's correct.
And it looks like there was a little decrease and then increasing again. Is that a trend, or is this just a short data set, small data set?
As our calls go up, the trend is going to go up because we don't have enough to manage we don't have enough to manage larger events on our own. So what's not captured in those numbers is the times that mutual aid comes in Orono because we're not available. We don't track that. We could pull it through the regional communication center through some effort. But the number of times that we're committed and have to bring in other resources or other agencies isn't recorded. So that just reflects the times that we were operating at something and needed to bring somebody in to support us directly.
I think the numbers that are very telling that Chief Lowe provided is the 123 times that we had double or triple calls. By the time we have a double call, the station is empty. And I think that is kind of, if I was going to look at numbers, it wouldn't be how many building fires we have. The fire department, they respond to a lot and they do a lot, but they're also an insurance policy. I don't think that it's fair to judge them based on the number of tones they reach. That's not indicative, because they could go a day. They haven't in a very long time without a call, but all the training has to be there and the ability to make the call has to be there.
Sure. Yeah. I offer this as just sort of my own perspective on where I am at this point in the budget process, in the hope that if other people feel the same way, we can kind of expedite this part of the conversation. I'm not interested in seeing changes to our fire service level for this budget year, but I am interested in a community conversation that brings more people in town into an assessment of how we want to be strategically planning for public safety in the future. And I'd like to do that after the budget process. So that's where I'm at. I am also really appreciative that it seems like there are a number of fire people here tonight. And so if any of you had something that you wanted to chime in on by way of public comment, this seems like a great opportunity for that from my perspective, although I'll leave it to the chair to facilitate. But that's where I'm at. I'm not really interested in entertaining service level changes to fire at the moment. I see Sarah nodding. Is anyone else interested in that? Or could we make this a fairly concise part of the meeting?
Well, we can, and I'd
Great.
like to, but I want to address both of the documents that we
Okay.
asked staff to put together
Great.
for us. So we have the fire response document over the past several years, and then the other document was Chief's response to specific questions that counselors asked him.
Council Wingard, can I throw something
Yeah,
in there
please
real
do.
quick in relation to those documents? I had noted in, I think it was the first document, that NFPA recommends 15 firefighters. I recommend at least 8. We're at 5. I'm not coming forward and asking for 8 people. And I don't see that on the immediate horizon because it's not fiscally responsible or doable. I think that's the goal that we should be aiming for, and that would meet a considerable amount of our need. But I'm not proposing that as something that we should be chasing down right now. And I think Councilor Demerit last night may have thought that that's what I was looking at or where I was going, and that's not it at all. I mean, I realize there has to be a balance here, and that's part of the balance, is not to jump at something until you're ready to do it. financially, we're not ready to do that as a community. So,
Well, and we're also in the first year of a 3-year pilot to be able to see what additional staff does in terms of overtime numbers, in terms of improved response, and quite honestly, in terms of wear and tear on our employees.
I really appreciate you saying that because it was thrown out a couple times the other night that, and my concern with stuff being kind of thrown out like that is that now it's fact. That's what we're doing. So I appreciate you clarifying that. You said we're at 5. Are we at 4 of 6?
We're at
What-
4 shifts of 6. 3 of them are funded through the SAFER grant.
yeah, I guess I was flashing back to the old business. Sorry.
I think though, since I brought it up yesterday, I think I like that I want to know, and this is kind of why I think about, why the analysis we'll do on the public safety building that we talked about last night or a couple nights ago, last night. And then, having a conversation about where the community sees itself heading in terms of public safety comprehensively, I think it's important. And I think that if, not the budget for 8 this year or maybe even next year, but if that's what it's going to take to serve our community, then we need to be having that conversation with the community.
One other thing I do want to ask about is the ambulance piece. It did in fact say in our folder, which I read after, that it is a 2-year build time. So I didn't ask that question like to verify what.
Yeah.
I just read it today, so I didn't read it before. So it sounds like that is the case. It's a 2-year lead time on getting an ambulance. Is that accurate or is it not accurate? Because I know you also mentioned that it may or may
It
not. be.
hasn't gone out to bid. We won't know for sure until it goes out to bid what the lead time will be. We're hearing there's a 2-year build time. You go into the police cruisers and you hear there's a 1-year or 18-month build time. There's also vendors that have ordered 8 months ago or 9 months ago to glut their lots so that they had the cruisers for people to get. So, yes, it could be 2 years, but we might look into something else.
My other question on that, I guess, is what is it that's driving? I know it's a 2016 with, but what else about that ambulance is driving us to say we've got to replace this now?
So the idea behind that is, we know about when the breakover is to start having mechanical issues and those things with the vehicles. That's our fleet manager has identified that stuff. That's Captain Brian Hardison. And to have a breakdown or to have ambulances out of service because they're starting to see extensive wear is a detriment to the overall system. Because if we have an ambulance go out, then that's 50% of our EMS calls we can't respond to with an ambulance.
You can't get a renter.
There are no more loaners out there. In the past, we were able to get a loaner. I shouldn't say 50%, but that's a considerable number of EMS calls, second calls we're not going to be able to respond to. There are no loaners out there. To have a vehicle that has no mechanical problems to be transporting a patient in it is negligent and could potentially put us at liability. So expecting that we're going to have vehicle issues, if that in fact happens, we start running a series of mechanical issues with the vehicle as it ages out, that places alert risk on us globally as far as being aware that there's a problem and not addressing it, if that makes sense. Those are some of the biggest.
It does. Does this, so this vehicle doesn't have any known issues with it, or it does?
They don't right now because they have been on a regular rotation basis and the maintenance on them has been able to keep up with whatever has come down the line. But like the ladder truck that you haven't seen for months, the older it gets because of its use and just the truck in general, the more frequently it's going to require heavy duty maintenance, if you will, beyond oil changes and stuff like that. We see the same things with the ambulances because they have that 12-volt system inside where we run pumps and all the other devices. They have the emergency lighting, they idle a long time, those types of things.
I know we talked about the idle. Are they diesel?
They are gas.
So I agree with everything Chief said, but I also would say that it has been a tone or a resounding kind of questioning on council. This idea of running equipment into the ground, like, is it breaking down? Let's not replace it until it breaks down. And my concern with that is, number one, these are emergency vehicles and we need to respond. It would be different if it was an administrative vehicle, and which is why we have rolled vehicles out of fleets to use for administrative vehicles. I think the other piece that has not been discussed is, for a very long time, Orono has been able to attract high quality employees. And we do that not because we pay the best and not because we go out and buy outlandish things, but because we're constantly sending a message that they matter and they are professionals. And you start putting people in vehicles that are breaking down, you start having things that are rusting out, and that is going to change. It's going to change, and it's not a threat. It's when I look at the world of recruitment and I'm trying to figure out how to get our small piece of the pie, these are the intangibles that are driving people to places of employment.
I guess I would just say that at 82,000 miles, I understand they idle a lot. I understand they're stored indoors. I understand they're cleaned off. They're probably not rusting out. I understand what you're saying and I appreciate that, but I don't think another year is necessarily running it into the ground either. So that might have been a little more than.
I'm not talking about just the ambulance deal. I'm talking about other equipment, other vehicles and pieces of equipment that we have come up.
I just wanted to talk about the ambulance.
And
right now, so.
I would also, what I sent back to council today is also reminding folks, when you kick the can, the expense is still there. Whether you pay it or not.
No, but if
The
you get another
expense is
year
still
use
there.
out of a vehicle, it does postpone the expense. So yeah, it will be there. I understand that. I mean, that's how we all do buy things, right? We can either get another year out of that car or buy a new one.
So in my personal life.
No, I know, and I know we're not
Yes,
talking
I
about
would-
person, but
I
it
one
works
hundred
the
percent
same.
agree with you.
Okay. So go ahead.
Well, I wanted to say thank you hugely. Like, I found this document super useful and I especially appreciated all the part about calls that Sophie called out. That was really, really helpful to me. I felt like I walked away with a much better sense of what's happening at the fire department. And thank you to all of you. It's like a treat to see you when my dryer is not on fire, which is probably the last time I saw this many of you. So mostly huge thanks. I did notice that sort of half the questions that were on the matrix got answered and half didn't. And I think maybe it's because they're not really to you. There were a bunch of numbers about finances and what different staffing levels cost us and also what they gain us. Because my understanding is we also then provide services for other towns that pay us to do it. I am with Sonia that I have no need for any of that in this budget cycle. I'm very clear that we're staffed at the level we're at and we have this great grant and we're trying out stuff. So for me, none of those questions are about wanting to change any staffing level. They are about wanting to have data for the community about what we get for each service level, what we would lose, which is really clear in this document to me with any changes, but also what each service level costs us. Because I don't want to have a community conversation where that cost data isn't also part of it for people. And that's all I have. It's for later down the line.
So I'm happy
Yeah.
to provide that later down the line. There is no bandwidth to do that right
No,
now.
I did never want it now. It was always a down the line thing for me. So thank you for what's there and I'll look forward to what's coming. And I agree with Sonia. If people here have things they wanted to share, I hope we get to hear from folks.
And
Thank
I
you.
think we did have a raw number of about $425,000 in EMS revenue that was discussed at one,
Yeah.
but it's not broken out.
By what service level gets us that, I think is important to
Yeah,
know.
we
Because it
can-
is income that matters.
Yeah, so we can, I think, post budget discussion,
Yeah.
right, as part of our
Perfect.
community public safety discussion, we should do that. So in our budget discussion thus far, the only change that we have made was the staff recommendation to extend, or we haven't made it yet, but the change that we have mostly discussed with the staff recommendation to extend the life of the ambulance out to change that reserve pricing structure. Before we move ahead in the budget process, are people comfortable with that? Like, we don't vote in workshop, but I kind of like to give Sophie a nod if that's something that we're going to continue.
Say that again.
So that was the change from purchasing the ambulance in the short rotation to stretching into the longer rotation, which puts it at 108,000 per year. That seemed to be acceptable to most people, but I don't want to.
Isn't it currently in the budget? What's in there, 98 or something like that?
So what's in there right now is 198,000. That hits taxes.
But is that what you're talking
We
about?
have 90,000 of
Yeah.
ARPA to get us into the stable plan. I would only be recommending ARPA if you're gonna use it to get us to a stable plan. Otherwise, it's creating another spike.
It's in summary C, that document, right?
Yeah.
So
So
It's 108, starting now, and then for the next 27, it's gonna be 108, right? And then like one, it's something
Going-
different.
No, going from now for 8 years, calculated in unless inflation hits us at more than 3% a year from the current expense, it would be $108,000 a year for the next 8 years.
I thought it jumped after we got the next one or something. But
I personally loved that plan. I thought it was really great because it was stable for us over time, but.
it makes sense. Okay.
So you're gonna accept that?
So, well, I have Chief Lowe here and, Deputy Chief Demeritt. Do we have any other public safety questions or concerns from council? I invite public comment before we move on from this section. You guys come out, you don't have to public comment, but if you choose to, that's fine as well. I'll entertain that. So, yeah.
I know one thing is that this department and this town has grown over the years and has maintained their apparatus. And the point we're at now is that to get it trucks, whether it's an engine or a ladder or an ambulance, the time to get it is, we don't want to be down and have catastrophic failure of a truck because it's 20 years old. We should have planned on replacing it or tried replacing it sooner. This department has grown since the time I've been here exponentially. And the apparatus town's been great at giving us, keeping the apparatus going, replace them on a regular basis that we need to do our job. Because it's affects the quality of service we give the public. And also it's our safety too. In fact, that if something happens, we're in a fire or transporting a patient and the ambulance breaks down. Those are issues, and we have done good over the years. Like I said. And so I strongly urge to keep that up. Because like Chief mentioned, if we're down an ambulance, there's calls that we can't answer. And that's not good for the public.
I think the challenge is, growth, exponential growth. I mean, the tax base hasn't grown exponentially, but so we've got to, so we're trying to figure out ways and we need to have a broader conversation beyond several of us are new on the council. So it's kind of I think it's a conversation that we need to have with the community about how we get to the right size and sustainability and affordability and service. So
I think Brian is talking not just about the size of the department, but the fact that when he started on this department, there wasn't an ambulance. There was no ambulance. There were 3 people on a shift in the call department. Our population has exploded since Brian has been on the department.
33 years.
Yeah, it's a long time.
since the start. Yeah.
So, yeah, and I will just say, this is the first time in my 12 years that we have had a showing like this from employees. So I guess I would really like to see what's driving this.
So I guess, David Daniel, I'm the Vice President of the local. We're showing support for the budget that was developed through our administration, and it also was developed by a lot of us within the department. So we are very cognizant of the needs of the community, and we don't take things lightly. And I am appreciative of your statements of working towards the future to educate yourselves and us to, as we move forward. I think staffing, of course, is one of the biggest things that we can really take a look at and make sure we preserve that we have worked very hard. Those numbers that we have now, as Chief Lowe has pointed out, are bare minimums. And we have had very good success with grants, not only for equipment, but for staffing levels. And I would really like to continue to work together as a community to make sure those levels stay there so we can have an effective, safe working environment for our people and to deliver a product to the community that, you know, the community is proud of. So thank you for that for this year, and I look forward to working with you in the next years to come.
Thank you.
We're still on public safety.
We're still in public safety.
So we talked about one of the cruisers as a potential savings item in the materials, and I'd like to discuss that.
Okay.
Dan, can you come up? And I think Belle and Dan have worked on they have a presentation.
So in order to preserve space, I'll just do it from here.
Okay, we can hear you.
Yeah, she's in the
Okay.
back room.
Okay, behind the curtain.
And can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so Dan, are you handing out what we prepared today? The spreadsheet and the projections?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Everybody's got one.
Okay, so Dan and I took a look at expenses over the past several years, and for the repairs, as well as when we have replaced cars. And then we tried to make a projection with when cruisers would need to be replaced in order to keep the average age of the cruiser fleet at or below 4. We're seeing that kind of that 4-year mark is pretty critical. Our volunteer extraordinaire would tell you that a frontline cruiser, so if you're looking at the screen, everything above that blue line is a frontline cruiser, that they get about 25,000 miles a year. And below that blue line, the use drops off precipitously. Car 65 is the DC's, the deputy chief's vehicle, that's Dan's, and car 67 is the captain's vehicle. And then we have a vehicle for the detective to use, and a vehicle that we need to keep in good working order in case we have a frontline cruiser down. Dan, is that a fair description?
Yes. Very accurate.
So the cruisers
Hey, hold
are
on.
a little,
Sarah had a question real quick.
okay, go
I was
ahead.
just trying to, the page that's on the screen, it doesn't seem.
So it's not in your handout. So what I want to do, what I was going to say is that the cruiser rotation is kind of confusing. So I want to walk you through what happened in FY23 so that then you can look at the projections and understand kind of what's happening without what you will see as literal moving parts.
Hey, Bill,
Thank you.
just I think you just said that you think 4 years is kind of a critical point. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes. The average age of the cruisers, of the cruiser fleet, 4 or
I'm just
lower.
looking at 23 repairs, and that seems like that would be a hard conclusion to pull out of the data that you provided to me, because we've got a 3-year vehicle that's our biggest expense, obviously, and then a 7-year vehicle. That's the rest of them are fairly.
So
so I'm
the 3-year vehicles are 2020 vehicles. those were built in a factory that had been stripped down and then rebuilt. And so there was quite a significant delay in receiving those cruisers in the first place. And then if you kind of Google it on the internet, you see that we're not the only ones who are having fairly significant issues with the 2020s. So it's not unusual that you might have a 3-year vehicle that has some big repairs, but those are exceptionally large repairs
Are they?
for a 3-year vehicle. But let me show you what's happened this year. And then we can kind of walk through the 2 different projections I provided for you. So the first thing that happened was Cruiser 62 was dropped down and it was renamed and called 67. What had been 67 left the fleet. And then 62 was replaced. This was really FY22's funding, but we didn't get these cruisers in until late summer of 2022. And then we had to wait for the upfitter to be available. So these did not become available to use for our frontline vehicles until I think it was November and January. So 62 was from FY22 funding. Then 60 left the fleet and was left entirely, and it was replaced with funding from FY22. These are both hybrid vehicles, and Dan has been tracking the mileage on these, the gas mileage on these, and has seen an improvement.
Hey, sorry, Belle. 62 on your thing says it's age 1. On ours, it says age 5.
She just said that the, what had been
That turned into 67.
62
Sorry.
became 67, and then there's a new 62.
And
What you're
62.
looking at, it's hard to say exactly because these cruisers move during the year, exactly which age. What I tried to do is look at when the repairs were done and which vehicle they were done to, and kind of keep that year intact when I show you the repairs. In the tables down below. There are lots of moving parts. It's not going to be 100% exact, but by the end of FY23, so when we started FY23, our average age was 5.375. 65, we cycled out and put in a new vehicle, and that was the FY23 funding. And that was the chief's vehicle. There was not a hybrid available, so we did not want to put it on the front line. And the chief's vehicle had some fairly significant repairs and then needed something more. So that's why we replaced the chief's vehicle rather than a frontline vehicle. After we did all of those things, at the end of FY23, we had an average age of 3.25 years, and we invested $55,907. So if you then look at your projections, I did 2 different projections for you, one projection A, one projection B. The A is replacing 2 vehicles this year. B is replacing 1 vehicle this year. And my goal was to keep the average age of the fleet kind of at or below 4, and to try to minimize the number of years where we had a 4-year-old vehicle as a frontline vehicle. When I did that and, kind of played around and monkeyed with 1 here, 2 here, etc., I came up with, for projection A, a total capital investment of 509,000, and for projection B, 514,000. But essentially, with a 6-year rotation cycle, you're looking at an $85,000 a year investment with either projection. I would expect, based on if we only replace one vehicle this year and we keep one of the 2020s as a frontline car, of course, we'd keep the one that didn't have the major repairs necessary. But I would expect that you're probably going to have the same type of failures that happened with the one 2020 with the other 2020. So we would recommend increasing the repair budget by $10,000.
Where we've already invested and fixed that one, wouldn't you not consider using that as the front line and then one, I mean, I'm sure they're not all, but it sounds like there's an issue, probably that it'd be bad luck, not that we wouldn't have it, but that they both, 2 out of 2 of ours actually fails, but I guess it sort of doesn't matter because you could, if that one did fail or have a major failure, then the one that was already fixed could take place, I guess.
Yeah, and I think the people who drive the vehicles every day have a very good feeling as to whether or not the one that was just repaired is in better shape than the one that didn't have the failures. Our volunteer Cookie, he takes very good care of the cruisers. He would probably have feedback. What I just said is not necessarily 100% like that's exactly the one that would rotate out or whatever, but I would expect that regardless of which one rotates out, you are likely to have the same failure that you had before, and have extensive replacement or extensive repair costs for that particular vehicle. Maybe you won't, but
So we
you should
bog
plan.
down what the decision is gonna be, because we make the decision on which vehicle leaves the fleet when we finally get the car, and we evaluate along with Richard Rideout, our mechanic, to decide which vehicle needs to be rotated out. I think what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing is the question in front of council is if you want to look at this as getting us on a cycle that makes sense, we're looking at an $85,000 a year investment, either way you do it. If you're going to only want to purchase one vehicle this year, we're saying the operating budget was based upon a new vehicle. So we would amend the operating budget to increase the repair line.
And how much is the repair line going up, Sophie?
10,000, so from 20 to 30, Bell?
And the reduction is 59.
But I do think that really the recommendation would be to look at considering a regular cycle of that 85,000 like you're doing with the ambulance.
Could we do that and then push off? I mean, give one cruiser this year, but put another 30 in a reserve fund. So when that reserve fund pops up into enough money to buy a year where we have to buy 2 cruisers, we get the second cruiser in that year. So we have a consistent 85,000, inflation is going to do what inflation is going to do. But so what I'm saying, I don't know if I'm suggesting this, but what I'm wondering, thank you, is take the 85, put it away, use 57 of it to buy one cruiser. The other 28,000 sits in a pot. And then next year, the 28 is enough to get us into 2 cruisers instead of one. And we do it that way. budgeting the 85,000 instead of having years where we have to go 120 for 2 new cruisers versus.
I think. I'm sorry.
No,
I-
yeah,
Sure.
My wondering is,
Well, I mean, I think one of the things we've been recommending all along is to get on schedule with vehicles and equipment, period, and to look at long-term asset management, asset planning, so that it is consistent. This is the cost. This is the cost of running this size fleet. I don't know if your numbers exactly work, but if I know where council's going, I can build a plan that would tell you what that would.
Interesting seeing.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, can I ask a question just about the papers we're looking at? And
Yep.
am I correct that projection A has us replacing 2 cars this year and projection B has us replacing 1, correct?
Yeah,
And the reason that they come out at the same cost in the end over this 6-year time period is because when we get to year 27 and 29, we're replacing 2 cars on both of those years if we don't replace 2 this year, whereas otherwise we only need to replace 2 on 29. Am I correct? That's how the car totals come out the same,
and,
They just-
and that's,
27 and 29 versus more cars now.
Same
Right.
number of cars.
I know, but I mean,
Yep.
distributed differently. They're either happening
Yep.
this year or you're looking at them happening in this projection that you've given us. An extra one would happen in 27. That doesn't happen otherwise. Correct?
yes.
So I think for me, given that, and I appreciate it's useful to see these numbers, given that it seems like it will be a wash financially with these 2 scenarios, I would err on the side of buying 1 cruiser for this year, which gives us, again, another year to be having a sort of a deliberate conversation around with staff input and community input on desired levels of service, looking forward into the future. And then we can strategize toward the longer rotation that we're gonna need in the longer term. And from sort of channeling Cheryl and a little bit of an environmental perspective, there is an advantage to, I see the disadvantage. We want our cruisers to be in good shape. And also there's sort of a clear environmental advantage for keeping things going as long as possible. So that's where I'm at on this one personally, but I would build a consensus around what others are thinking.
do you think it's 85,000 and whatever it is to get on this schedule into this budget and using it to buy 1 cruiser this year and then some 2 cruisers next year? Or do you think it's just buy the 1 cruiser now, don't book the extra 30, whatever it is?
Well,
So can I?
I'm sorry. Director, if we did that 85 starting now on this schedule on projection B, we're not at the point where we buy 2 cars until 27. By then, we would have saved up enough by sure to buy those 2 cars. If we kept putting 85 in every year, we'd be like way over that. Wouldn't it be at that point or close?
It's not the remainder between 59 and 85.
No, this year we would only put in the remainder because we'd be spending part on a car. Next year we'd buy 1 and we'd put in the remainder of the 85 that we didn't spend on that car into the fund. The 3rd year we'd buy another one. We'd put the remainder that was up to 85 in, and by year 27, all that remainder would have added up to purchasing the second car.
So,
Correct.
yes, so the goal, just like with the ambulance.
Right.
Is to get to a place where it is consistent. And that you might have to adjust, but you can adjust over time if you're looking at 8-year increments or 10-year.
Yeah, so there'd be less of a spike that happens because that fund is there.
So the only thing I would suggest is it would, if you're only gonna do 1, I would do the 1 tend to operations and the remainder to reserve. Just because I don't want to leave Dan in a position where he's overspending his line and we're not proactively taking care of things because we have to save that money to break down or that money
So,
to spend.
Yeah.
How do we, where did the 15 come from? That was different. It's been roughly 15, 19, 20, and 22.
Are you looking at this, Leo?
Looking at the vehicle maintenance,
Okay, thank you.
roughly been 15 grand this year. It looks like it was 30. Where did that extra come from? I know we approved 5 over at one point for repair. I think I remember that. But where did the 15, extra 15 come from for vehicle repairs in this in
Extra
23?
15, like expense,
Yeah,
vehicle repairs. The,
but did you just say that we needed to boost something up?
so we put 20 in this year's budget because we were expecting to get the 2 older problematic cars out of the fleet. If those 2 older problematic cars aren't going and one of them is gonna remain, then we're running older cars. When we look at the cost of repairs, which is going up, we're saying we would have put $30,000 in that repair line.
But we right now have 20.
In the budget, right now you have 20.
30 for next year. See,
I'm interested in following that line. I mean, I think for all the reasons that have already been stated, so I won't be redundant.
I'm in agreement with what you just laid out.
I missed what you said, Rob.
I think I am, I think for us postponing this and getting on this schedule that if we were in accordance with projection B, where we wait until FY 27 versus the next one and also put away the 30 as Dan is suggesting, I think, or whatever that number ends up being according to your projections. I think this is probably the way that I would like to see us go.
So we're gonna net the budget to 85 is what you're saying.
So we're not seeing any, just, I want to be clear because I'm confused. We're not seeing any cost savings, but we are committing to only purchasing 1 cruiser this year.
Here we are. We could,
They're
you see
putting money in a
14,000.
reserve instead of
Right,
into the
right.
car.
But we're not giving any money back to the,
If it was
We've got that
85, if it
right.
was 118 or
So
whatever.
85 is a savings. Just-
Yeah.
If you guys will let, I'm happy to do the math and get it back out to you.
yeah, that's fine. Okay,
I just need to understand what you want.
okay, thank you, Belle and Dan and everybody for that discussion. Any other, I want to take a break at each section because we're moving hopefully quickly.
I want to make sure Sophie has clarity on what we want. So we want to not purchase the second cruiser this year. We want to put funding into the reserve so that we have sort of more flexibility in meeting those needs in the future. And we're increasing the maintenance line as is appropriate to compensate for the age of the vehicle. Have I summarized correctly?
Yes.
The
One more thing, I think we
Yep.
said we wanted to budget in the future at that 85 level, not at the replacement cost for 1 car,
great,
Right,
right?
yeah,
Yes.
85 in perpetuity.
great.
Good. Okay, any public comment on this section of the public safety budget? Okay, we have just a few minutes before we are scheduled to go into executive session, but I don't want to waste time, and we do have some budget summary and comparative tax rate information that Sophie provided to us.
They have
Right.
updated and I can tell you
Great.
why. So if you remember, you had ABC.
Now we have to
We went back to school.
So sure, one packet.
1 packet per. As I often do during the budget process, when we're making projections mid-year, we always go back towards the end of May to look again. Spent some time with our town clerk today and made a change to revenue sharing. Not revenue sharing, excise tax. Increased it from $750 to $770. So that would be $770,000. So that's an increase of $20,000 in revenue. So that changes your net and your revenue lines. Just wanted to show it so you were working with the same assumption. Now, I kept A, B, and C because it corresponds with the cuts that have, or the reductions for A, B, and C. So this doesn't show the cruiser that you just did. But it does include those ABC levels. And I think the other question I have is whether or not you're gonna accept the downtown transit oriented TIF paying for the retaining wall repair. And if you're gonna accept the ambulance 8-year cycle. Did we agree we were gonna do
I
the
think we
8-year
agreed we
cycle?
already
Okay.
Agreed to the 8-year cycle. We haven't talked about the if for the wall repair. So maybe we can skip to C, because that's the most comprehensive set of cuts or changes to the budget. Is there anything on that page C that we want to discuss? And we need to let Sophie know yes or no, whether we're going to make that shift to capital infrastructure.
Well, we just made a change to the cruiser line, obviously, and then. But other than that, I'm comfortable with everything in the appendix C as a move forward.
I'm of the same mind.
So
Can you repeat and briefly summarize what is in C again?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
So
Thanks.
that's the ones with holes in it. 31.
So C has
Great. Thank you.
$1,000 reduction for moving the forecasting software. It has, I've lost my. Oh, okay, excellent. It has. So it has $1,000 for hazmat, hazmat paying for the forecasting equipment. It has the $6,500 for lights on Grant Road moving to FY22, and we're gonna have a budget adjustment for you to fund that out of leftovers. It includes the $3,500 of town manager professional services. I will tell you that line is over expended at this point. It includes the $4,500 savings that Rob brought up by accepting the state bid for salt. It includes the ambulance using $90,000 of ARPA funding. Elongating that from a 6-year cycle to an 8-year cycle and committing to $108,000 a year commitment, whether it's buying or leaving. I don't know what I just did, but I just lost. That was one. It also includes using $50,000 of downtown transit-oriented TIF funds to pay for the retaining wall, which quite frankly, I would have done at the beginning of the budget, but I was not sure of the value given the hotel coming down and I didn't want to run a spread.
I'm fine with all of these.
I am as well.
Okay. So Sophie, I think folks are comfortable with all those, including transfer the cost if for the retaining wall.
So if you give me just 1 minute, I can tell you what the new number looks like.
From all of those, the actual cut to spending is the 3,500 plus the 4,500, correct?
No, he had, oh, I'm sorry, $96,000 for the electrician that you pulled.
It's in there at 2.
And we had brief discussion about this truck. That's also the lift truck is also a cut, right? I understand where the revenue is coming from, but from our original expense budget, we had $135,000 in there that we're taking out of the capital line, correct?
Yes,
So
it results in zero net change to the bottom line. It's in your list.
well,
It's in your list.
I understand that. I read it in the list. It is a cut off our expense budget, and that's what I'm looking at. That's part of what I'm looking at. The other part is how does it impact our tax bill? And I realize does not impact the tax bill, but it is a cut from our expenses.
Correct.
You got it. That's correct.
So at this point, with everything we've talked about, municipal operating expenses are at $12,267,885, a difference of $811,431 or 7.08%. Capital is at $2,385,680, increase of $603,025 or 33.83%. The net Total municipal expenses at 14,653,565, a difference of 1,414,456 or 10.868%. Revenues are up $20,000, so I'm just gonna give you the proposed is now 9,685,532. Your net municipal assessment stands at $4,968,033, a decrease of $95,686 or minus 1.89%.
That's not on here yet, obviously. That's not C. That's what we just added to C.
C, it's C plus. Yes,
It's always been good enough for me. Yeah.
over here thinking of programming languages.
Yeah. I had some other suggestions, but I sent this around late to your emails, and I apologize for that. I worked on it a big chunk of the afternoon than I thought I would. I had a few more suggestions in the proposals that we were kind of everything but public works.
Mhm.
And I wanted to kind of frame up a discussion about how I thought we could take on a level of service questions around walkability that we're gonna have to deal with next week when we look at the June 5th conversation.
Maybe you can introduce the theme because we've got 2.5 minutes before, or 3 minutes before we have to break.
Okay.
So
Looking at expenditures, I thought we had an opportunity. Library delivery savings was small dollars and a small, small impact. And I thought that made sense. That was $1,400. The ice rink painting for $2,500. I thought that would make sense, and I think we could open up an opportunity for the community to come together and take on that project with some funding. I doubled up on the town manager professional services line. Apparently it was an appendix C, so I mistakenly included it here. I included $16,000 to reflect the reduction in pool hours for anticipated staffing levels, if that's actually comes to pass.
So at this point in time, it looks like we can fund. We have staffing for all of the pool hours.
Okay.
So
Awesome.
Wow, that's wonderful news. Thank you.
Yeah,
Scratch that, Dan.
scratch.
That's exciting.
Leo's biggest, yeah, I get it. All right, I'll scratch that. And then we talked about the police cruiser already. I proposed 57,000, but we came to a different consensus, which I feel really good about. Concerned about where we are with the recycling, the curbside, and whether or not we're actually recycling or not, and what we're paying in tipping fees for that. And I'd like to have a discussion, and obviously we don't have time to do it right now, but I'd like to have a discussion about where it makes sense for us to use unassigned fund balances for, as I read the budget, we booked $300,000 revenue in unassigned fund balances. Is that right?
we booked $300,000 to use $300,000 of unassigned fund balance. I will just say that we have been working really hard to wean down the draw, because you're creating a structural gap in your budget. And if we were looking at things like Keith Anderson and Birch Street School, that would be a place that to get our repairs kind of jumpstart a cycle there, that would be somewhere that I would actually look at potentially reallocating assigned to unassigned.
Right. Your presentation on the unassigned, usable portion of the unassigned fund balance said the range was between, the usable portion, the range was between 1.8 and 2.6. We used 300,000. So that's kind of I saw that as an opportunity for some of these things that I think we need to make a transition potentially on the recycling, curbside recycling, if we're not actually recycling that material. I like that. So I think this is an opportunity to make that kind of transition.
I would like to talk about that more as well, because I am interested in thinking about how we can use those funds for environmental priorities best, and whether that's recycling or whether that's other environmental priorities. I would love to discuss more, and I'm curious how and where we could fit that in the next little bit of time.
No one, we just have seconds left. I'm sure we're probably already stepping over it. I mean, we get into a lot of granularity with this, and I like it. I have big picture ideas in mind in terms of what I think, what I think our trends have been and where I think we need to end up in terms of spending. So I think we still have some work to do. For me to be satisfied, we got there. I don't speak for anybody else, but it's,
So we have, we do have to break because we have a hard stop. And I think we'll have time, a little bit of time at least, to begin to address these things in our next meeting, although we're running short on our deadline to produce the budget. But I think there's a lot of good stuff in here that we should revisit. Before we break and go, I want to ask for public comment for one last time. I know people have come out. I want to be respectful of people's time. Bill, if there's anybody online that wants to offer public comment as well before we have to take a break into our executive session. Well,
I don't see any hands raised.
great. Well, then let's close this workshop, adjourn this session. We'll move into executive session. Thank you.
thank you.
Appreciate it.